much for joining us today. I really appreciate the time.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks so much for having me.
Yeah. So we're 1 year basically into the pandemic. I'm just curious at the onset how it's changed your work environment. Were you working from home, et cetera?
Well, I am 50 weeks in to working from home. So have been doing that. I've had to go into the office maybe 1 or 2 times for some IT support as some of those kinds of things opened back up, and it's a very different experience, but have been very fortunate to have been able to have worked from home through all of this.
Same. Yeah, we have been fortunate as well. Great. Before we jump into some of the questions, I'm hoping you can just kind of tell the audience your roles and responsibilities and your tenure and the line of businesses that you touch there at AT&T.
Yeah, absolutely. So I am the Assistant Vice President of Media Strategy here at AT&T, and I focus on all things B2B. So I oversee the AT&T business portfolio from a media strategy perspective, which includes small, medium enterprise customers across a multitude of products and services. I also have responsibilities over our corporate brand initiatives. And so that includes things like our CSR initiatives, external affairs, public affairs, and any sort of broader reaching brand messaging that we would be putting out there from an AT&T perspective. I've been here for 6 years and, have, 16, 17 plus years experience in the industry, and, couldn't be happier with what we've been able to do here at AT&T.
Awesome. Thank you so much. So given our topic today, I just wanted to first just kind of level set on how you see the two channels that we're discussing today. Can you kind of give me a 30,000 foot view of how you see linear versus digital video and CTV?
So I actually, from my perspective, I think you actually have to look at everything holistically, because it all comes down to how people are consuming video today, and people are, and which audiences and messages are resonating. And so you actually have to look at the picture holistically and understand where that's going, because you can't just look at them in isolation. You have to really put together a comprehensive video strategy that is inclusive of both CTV, OTT, as well as linear.
Yeah, we're seeing that from our clients as well too, just this merging of it being video, right? And regardless of the channel, it is still sight, sound, and motion across all those platforms and screens. During the pandemic, how have you seen audience shifts in these specific channels?
Well, I think you've seen a lot more people start at the acceleration of video consumption within OTT and CTV perspective. I think that has happened across the board. I think there was a point in time where I think you certainly also saw some spikes in things like news and linear TV. But as the pandemic happened and things like live sports disappeared from people's television sets, there was so much unknown going on. So people were looking, and people were home and asked not to go out and do things. TV kind of had a little resurgence in video and finding new content, and video content, I think, it became a great place for people to go and find some escapism.
Right. During our initial call, you mentioned millennials as business decision makers. Have you seen this demo change over the course of the pandemic, or was this shift actually transpiring prior to the pandemic?
Yeah, so this actually happened prior to the pandemic. So, we have been, from both sides of our house, the consumer side and the business side, have for a while been sort of working towards making sure that we're continuing to follow consumption habits of our audiences. And so that meant that we were shifting dollars into the OTT, CTV, TV-like space with these sort of digital platforms across, all lines of our business. And so when we started, 2015, 2016, one of the ways that we did that is we were looking through just sort of who your audience is. I think on the B2B side, a lot of times people immediately think that the CEO, they have an image of who the CEO, the CIO is, right, at a company, and of who that is and how you reach them. But actually, well over 50% of IT decision makers are millennials. So we've got to make sure that we had to make sure that we were doing things in different ways to make sure we were also reaching that audience as well. And one of those ways became CTV. And so it started off in places like very specific news focused channels that were geared to that audience, and how we could do some integrations there. And then slowly but surely, it certainly started to expand. And as consumption habits shifted, it realized it wasn't just the millennial B2Bs that were watching connected TV, all of our decision makers were as well. And so it stopped being the millennial B2B strategy and really just become table stakes as part of what we do today.
Awesome. Great. Let's kind of focus into linear right now. Do you remember how the pandemic changed your plans just before this time in March last year, and what you were planning for linear and what eventually happened?
Yeah, across the board. So we are one of the three presenting sponsors of the Masters in April. And fast and furious, we're working through the launch of a new campaign. In fact, when all of this happened, my counterparts were in LA getting ready to shoot shoot the spots and those productions got canceled. What was going to be this lovely, lofty, very big brand campaign, we quickly had to say, you know what, our customers are not like what do our customers need right now? Because businesses were so significantly impacted by this, from enterprises that needed to very quickly increase their bandwidth because all of their employees were going home and they needed additional network support, to our small businesses that were so impacted by some of these stay-at-home orders and those kinds of things. And so we really had to pivot our strategy and our messaging to understand how to make sure we were reaching them and saying and helping them in the way that we could with our products and services. And so, from a linear TV perspective, we felt like we had a really strong baseline in terms of what we kind of ongoingly had with sort of news presence, because that's where people were going, and we knew we were there. And then we really had to pivot a lot of sports because sports didn't happen. And so there's been a lot of time of understanding sort of what was going to happen in that marketplace and how things were shifting going through some of these kinds of things. And it really was an opportunity for us to sort of look holistically across, all of our TV investment across our company to make sure that we were speaking to all of our customers with the right messaging going on.
Right. I'm sure the challenges as they relate to sports were just almost impossible to work around. The Masters, I'm sure pretty quickly told you that they were going to have the event later in the year. So you had.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
So we certainly knew we got very, they're great partners. And so we certainly were able to quickly understand what that dynamic was going to look like and how that was going to go. And we're able to really do some great things with what they ended up doing from a replay perspective, as well as sort of when they actually had the tournament back in November. So, it's very, it was a very different year of how we would have expected it to be, but it taught us a lot.
Absolutely. So what do you anticipate as you get ready to approach the upfronts this year?
Well, I think there's still those sort of ongoing conversations like we're having today. Linear TV ratings are still eroding. Connected TV, OTT is still increasing. And so, we've got to continue to go back through and make sure that we are optimizing where we are appropriately to where our customers are. And then, thinking through sort of, advanced TV and sort of what we can do from a targeting perspective. And then, the pandemic has taught us nothing. It's that flexibility is key to any plan moving forward. Is that we've got to all be flexible and able to pivot, and we need our partners to be able to do that with us.
Absolutely. I think that's super important in the linear space, but also with all your partners now, right? We talked about that on our initial call, that flexibility is kind of the word of the day as it relates to planning anything in this environment right now. What do you think is going to be a permanent part of the outcome of the pandemic with regards to linear? Do you think there's something that was good that came out of it that you're going to utilize moving forward?
I think it really is from that perspective. I really do think the piece around, the flexibility and sort of the shifting of sort of the importance of that and building into plans. And I think the pandemic came, there was a lot of additional relationships that continued to be built with those partners as people really dug in to really try to help through some of those kinds of things. So I think just the strength of the relationships and partnerships that kind of, I think, came out of those to really start working towards sort of a common objective and really continuing to build in sort of that flexibility into what we need to do.
Absolutely. Great. Well, let's dive into digital, online, OTT, CTV, and talk a little bit about that channel. How are you currently utilizing this channel?
So we use it actually in a multitude of ways. So as I mentioned, we have multiple audience segments that we have products and services that best align to those products and services. And so, we certainly look at it from an overarching branding perspective. So when we think about our television investments and our connected TV investments, we think about from an upfront perspective. We certainly have sort of an element of what we would do there, but then it gets built into almost all of our plans now moving forward, even some of our performance-based plans, to make sure that we're continuing to drive demand and really using that channel to continue to enhance and tell our stories.
Right. Do you see that, and you talked about this a little bit, the continued increase in consumption on the OTTCTV side. Do you think that's making significant changes to your allocation to these channels, linear versus CTV?
I think it is. I think it's become table stakes. I think it's one of those things that it just has to be part of everything that we do. Linear is not. We've been very much a very digital first approach to what we do on the B2B side, and so it just becomes more predominant within some of the BAU tactics. And so it's almost for us less of a share shift from linear TV, from a share shift in from standard display.
Right. We talked a little bit about brand safety and brand suitability on our initial call, Megan, and you kind of said they're hand in glove. Really you have to think about both of them as equal kind of KPIs. Can you just talk about how you're managing brand safety and that suitability element?
Yeah, so there's a lot of deep partnerships with third parties that allow us to do that, really working very closely on inclusion and exclusion lists so that we're making sure that we're thinking through the content correctly within partnerships. And so it's just there's a lot that goes into what you would feel comfortable with, and there's nuance to that, because what one brand even sort of within our house feels comfortable with is different than maybe another one and another sort of brand within that umbrella, because as you're reaching a consumer might be very different than what you want to appear showing to a B2B. So there's a lot of work that has to go into it, to ensuring some of that quality piece is there, because it can't just be, let's just go target because they're there. You've got to continue to ensure that you're running in the right environments.
Right. And that targeting piece that you mentioned allows us to segue into the news of the week, which is Google's announcement. How do you foresee the space looking post cookies?
Very different. Though as I think about this, because we've spent a lot of time thinking about this, as I hope all brands are, because this is a pretty big shift. In that, we've all worked very hard to create these relevant one-to-one experiences. And that is sort of this pendulum is just shifting back. And so, in one instance, if we've been in the industry a while, we've kind of actually know how to do this because we've done it before. We just felt like we had evolved. But I think first and foremost, consumer privacy is really important, and it should be very important to brands. As publishers, and it's a really important issue, and we need to make sure that we are taking it very seriously. Mm-hmm. And so, but as things are moving quickly, things are shifting dynamically, things change every day in kind of this landscape as people are sort of working through it. For us, it's really about understanding that this is happening, really figuring out what we think that impact is and where those impact places are going to be, and starting now testing and learning into solutions that we think could be ways to offset that issue, and just sort of having to know that things are not going to be as targeted as they once were. But how do you find that balance in that space? And you've got to test your way into it, and you've got to be doing that now, because I mean, I can't believe it's already March. I feel like the new year happened. I blinked and it happened. So we're going to blink and it's going to be 2022 and we're going to be there. And so if we're not doing it now, it's going to be too late.
Yeah, similarly to while there's no one singular measurement tool for us, there's also now going to be not one singular means by which to go forward in this, kind of universal ID environment. What do you think? Virginia was the latest state to adopt CDPA. So now we have California and Virginia. And I think to your point, and you've kind of already answered this, it's just going to be a continuation of that adoption and less ability to target. So how do you think you're going to face that world moving forward?
For us, I think it becomes, sort of understanding the contextual space is going to really understanding sort of from that perspective. I think it's focusing and doubling down on your own sort of first party data, which is going to be really critical. It's also sort of partnering with other partners that have really strong first party data that they, within their own ecosystems. So I think, it's not just necessarily the walled gardens that are going to benefit, but I think it's also some of those premium publishers that are going to come back into resurgence, because they are going to be able to sort of internally do that. But I think you're going to just see a lot of what has become something where we worked really hard to sort of have this, very focused audience first approach that you worked to do at scale. That piece is just going to become more fragmented, and how you can go do that and where you can go do that. But, there's going to be solutions. Like, I think that's the other piece, is that, like, right now we're trying to figure out the interim steps of the solution, but there's going to be so much innovation in this space over the next few years that I really do think that we're going to find some additional solutions that are going to come to light that are going to end up working. And it may not be exactly how it was, but it's not going to be this like mass, like, you can't target anybody anymore kind of thing. Like that, there's a balance that will be struck, and I think we'll all find it.
Right. You talked about first party briefly there, and I'm assuming that from a small business portion, that is definitely a robust part of your targeting offering. But talk to me about, from a corporate standpoint, how do you utilize first party data with that segment of your business?
So that for us is, it's identifying, decision makers at companies, and really sort of thinking about it from a company level, and really just being fine tuned with what we need to do to reach those customers. A lot of times, on the enterprise side, it's a little broader, because there is such a really strong connection, within the B2B space. There's also a sales a component that, that happens in that dynamic. And so, we work really hard to make sure that we're creating relevant experiences for sort of decision makers at the company level, thinking through sort of what's the best way we can reach those through some account-based marketing.
Mm-hmm. Again, contextual will play a large role in that moving forward.
Yeah,
for sure. Talk to us a little bit about creative differences that you utilize in the digital space as opposed to the linear space. Do you modify creative for the digital side?
We do, yeah. So we have, and I've got great peers on our creative side who do a lot of really great work in that space. And so, we've all worked really closely to really make sure that we're thinking through, like, what is performing best in which mediums. And so most of the times, if they're going to go create a shoot a 30-second spot, they're not on the back end then going to go to try force a 15 and 6-second cut down. They've pre-scripted what they think that should look like, so that they're capturing those kinds of pieces when they go to build creative for those digital environments. And then we have video that is purpose-built specifically just for video, that is separate from anything we would ever run on linear, so that that we're continuing to enhance and create new messaging and new products and services to enhance, just talk about our products and services in those different ways.
Have you experimented with shortened creative, like 6 seconds? And
we have.
Yep. How was that experiment?
It's okay. Like, I think for us, on 6-second creative to try to impact extremely complex technology solutions is very, very difficult. So I think we really leaned into, in that 6-second space, being much more a way to sort of reinforce brand. And so, and key quick messages. So I think we really have seen 15s probably play out better for us than we have probably those 6-second spots, but it's something we continue to iterate on and use as reinforcement tools of sort of the brand and the brand messaging of people that we know are sort of in part of the campaign. So it's not just the only thing someone would see.
Right. We talked about this just briefly on our call in preparation for this, but you mentioned some of the things that you think are going to be staying powers with regards to creative messaging as it relates to the pandemic, empathy, things like that. Do you foresee that being something that's just kind of consistent and pervasive from here on out?
Yeah, I think it's really interesting because I think brands have to it'll be interesting to see the tolerance that people will end up having for the messages moving forward. I think the empathy, the need to like focus on sort of reconnecting, but I think there's also this element that people have some pandemic fatigue, and do they want to continue to be reminded everywhere they go of some of the limitations that we all feel. So I think that that'll be an interesting balance sort of moving forward of how responsive people want to be to what types of messages. So that's going to be pretty critical to really get under and make sure that everyone is understanding.
Got it. Right. Have you been impressed with any brand campaigns that you've seen during the pandemic? Some things that have stood out to you with regards to other brands?
It's a good question. I'm sure I have. And I think about just sort of the things that like I pay attention to more. I think some of the things that I just see. And so, there's things like retailers that I actively shop at that, used to be my quick escape on a Saturday that now become my like, oh, let me look at all these outfits that I want to buy. So I think I've seen a lot of really, pivots from a lot of retailers, I think, do some really interesting things. I think, there's been a lot of that. I think some of what people have done from as you think about like the delivery services and some of those kinds of things that people have just sort of pivoted to. And I think there's been a lot of really good work done, really across the board from a lot of brands that have really touched upon sort of the issues of the day, whether that be sort of how they're better servicing the needs of their customers to, a lot of really nice, empathy around sort of issues of the day that are happening.
Awesome. Well, I got some questions here. If you'd like, I'll field them from the audience and shoot them to you. The first one I have is: audio is inevitably a part of the creative conversation, especially when it comes to video. Any thoughts on best practices here?
Well, from an audio perspective, I guess I'm not quite clear on the question. Is like audio in terms of video or audio in and of itself?
Audio in and of itself. We have the ability to buy audio programmatically now as well too. So just curious if you're utilizing audio as a channel. And
we are, yes. I think we have found, and we have found that podcasts have been a really great way for us to reach our audiences, and really also be a way to really unpack and tell stories. There's really been some great content integrations that have happened that really can talk through complex issues in a really interesting way to an audience that is engaged. And so audio is definitely a very critical part of what we do. And I think it continues to go into that conversation of you've got to make sure that you're following customers where they are. And so that sort of customer first approach is really critical. And we are finding that that's another area that you're seeing that increase in consumption.
Right. So audio for digital is an emerging platform to some degree over the last couple of years. How do you approach emerging media channels, and what do you do with regards to evaluating those channels as you're utilizing them?
So as you have emerging, you start testing. You look at sort of where the audience is. You start evaluating the partners that are in that space, and you test them, and you make sure that you set up your measurement framework to understand what you're learning, and you just go do. A lot of times, they're not all, because you take a look and sometimes you see an emerging channel and you're like, "Ooh, that's really cool and that's so interesting," but business customers aren't there.
Right.
Doesn't mean the business customers won't be there one day, but they're not there right now, and so it's not the right fit. And then you have channels where you're like, "Oh my, this is happening. We're seeing this trend. I think there's an in," and you figure out how to go test it, and you test it.
Right. Right. So here's another question from the audience. How soon do you bring in creative into your campaign planning, the team and the strategy?
So I like to think, and again, my partner in crime, John, is we're hopefully attached at the hip as much as we can be. Really trying to make sure that when we sort of frame up the strategy, that if there's something new and interesting and different in play, that we're bringing each other in. If the creative team has an idea on something they want to go try, we try to go figure out how if we can make it work, and vice versa. So there's definitely a connection point there, because those two things sort of have to go together. And as we start getting learnings from from partners, from a media perspective, on things like best practices that they're starting to see, we want to make sure that our partners are part of that conversation, as they're always trying to make sure that we're staying on top of emerging trends from both a media and a creative perspective.
Got it. Got it. That's kind of touching upon workflow. And one of the other questions was, how has the pandemic affected your workflow? And do you think any of those changes will become permanent? I mean, you guys are a large organization, and
we are a large organization. And I will say the thing that I miss the most about being in the office is the random stopping someone in the hallway conversations of, "Hey, did you know?" Or, "Oh, you might need to know this," or those kinds of things. But honestly, I mean, technology and what technology has been able to do to connect people, like I don't think we've seen any kind of lack of productivity, and it's just become a new way of collaborating. And I think everybody was in the same boat, and so we all jumped in at the same time, and have figured that out.
Right,
you just
right.
pick up the phone instead of walking in the hall. You pick up the phone and you call somebody, you send somebody a text, you end up needing to over communicate sometimes, but you just have to make do with what's going on.
And I think you mentioned that you guys are not back in the office yet. Is there plans to go back into the office? I know you have a large presence here in Dallas with a lot of corporate space.
Yeah, so the latest we've heard is that not to expect to go back into the office until sort of midsummer, potentially. But I certainly do think that there's been an opportunity that they've seen that, I think it's like most companies, that the need to be in the office is not necessarily fully there. And so I think we'll see a mix of, people who have to be in the office versus a mix of people who will become, more flexible and virtual workers. But more to come on what that looks like and how that evolves. And
Absolutely.
we all might decide that we're tired of working from home and want to go see people. So
yes, for sure. Okay, let's end on a positive note. What is your hopeful or excited? What are you hopeful and excited for in 2021, both professionally and personally?
I think I'm ready for. I'm an extremely glass half full person. I am extremely optimistic, and so for me, I am really excited to see what we can sort of test and learn into sort of coming out of sort of the pandemic environment and into sort of things somewhat whatever this next normal looks like. I'm really interested to see how that plays out, and sort of just the advancements, the innovation that we're going to see that's come out of this experience, both from an advertising perspective as well as just in general. And then personally, I'm ready for. I have high hopes that we are on the tail end of this pandemic, and it will be a bright new day very soon.
I agree. Thank you so much, Megan Matlock, Vice President, Media Strategy at AT&T. I appreciate your time.
Thank you so much, Paul.
This was great. Thank you, Megan. Thank you, Paul. Bright new days ahead of us. Vaccine distribution in full swing. I think we are all ready I'm up here in New Jersey. It's been a pretty chilly winter, and there's like a 60-degree day on the horizon. I may take the day off, frankly, and just walk outside all day. I don't know. We're all like ready for it. I think we're gonna have the biggest travel season. This biggest boom we've ever seen vacation wise, right? It's gonna be nuts in a couple months, but in a good way, I hope, to contrast with this year. But thank you again, both of you. This was fantastic. Really appreciate your insights. And we're going to keep this rolling. We have one more session for you guys today. So thank you again, Megan. Thank you, Paul. And we're